Welcome back everybody, it's Crazy Welder, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at Resident Evil in VR. Yes, so finally, after many years of the original release of Resident Evil 7, we're finally getting something that's a little bit more akin to what's recently come out with Resident Evil 4 in VR. Now, this isn't necessarily a super new development. This has been circling the news for quite a while, but now as of a couple of days ago, we've actually finally been able to get our hands on what is possibly one of the best experiences you can have with Resident Evil games. Now, at the time of making this video, there are still a couple of quirks that need to be worked out with certain numbers of games. They are all playable in VR, starting from Resident Evil 2, then Resident Evil 3, 7, and also 8. There are also a number of the Devil May Cry games that are compatible with this particular VR release, specifically those that are made on the RE engine, so those will also be able to be playable as well, although you do need quite a beefy rig to be able to run them. So let's run through a couple of the gameplay examples of the ones that I was actually able to record in a sort of decent amount of frame rate, and also was able to actually get a good amount of footage out of it. We'll take a look at those, and then we can make our conclusions at the end of the video. So yes guys, here we are in Resident Evil 2 right now. As you can see, you can play the game in third-person mode should you decide to go that route, although I personally find this to be a little bit disorienting because you do have to still use the controller sticks to kind of move the camera around. Now, they are on the index controllers in my case, but as I said before, despite the fact that you can look around and up and down in ways that you really couldn't in the original game, you can also use FreeCam to move the camera around too using the mod menu. But what I have found is that rotating yourself inside the game when using this particular methodology usually results in me becoming extremely nauseous, so I tend to avoid this particular method of playing the game, although it is cool once you've kind of cleared an area of all the enemies to be able to just go back in and sort of roam around and just see what's what in VR, because the game does look absolutely fantastic. Now, on the 3090, I found that the settings needed to be dropped back quite a bit for this to be at a playable frame rate, and even then I was still getting a lot of reprojected frames. And as you can see, it's not running the smoothest. You can still see a bit of judder happening there as well. But really the best way to play is in first-person mode. Now, the way that you get there is you open up the menu by bringing the wrist up, your left wrist, up to your face and looking down at it. And then once you bring your right controller and point it at your left wrist, you'll be able to see the menu. It's a little bit unintuitive at first until you've tried it a couple of times, but it does kind of make it a little bit easier later on down the road so that you don't have to keep going back into the 2D version of the game, meaning potentially removing the OpenVR API DLL or just moving it to a different location, renaming it, what have you. Basically, you'll be able to just open up the menu and quickly adjust settings in-game. Now, for my personal use case, I found that the game really likes to force HDR mode on you when you first start. I would definitely recommend turning this off. It doesn't seem to play nicely with my Vive, for example. I don't know how many VR headsets actually officially support HDR anyhow, so more than likely that's going to be something that you're going to want to turn off for your headset as well. But now, as you can see, full control over your arms is available, so you can move the pistol around separately from the flashlight. Now, they do say that they've implemented full collision on the melee as well as, for the weapons. Now, I found that the weapon doesn't move objects around in the world, but then again, I'm not sure if those objects were physics objects to begin with in the first place. I don't think they were necessarily all marked that way. So you may find that a little bit distracting from games like Half-Life Alyx, especially given that the fidelity of the graphics is very similar to that. Of course, you do see the whole body of your character, but there is no, individual finger tracking that is turned on. It's just the availability of gripping weapons, etc. at this point in time. Now, I'm not sure if the aiming is 100% spot on. I've only killed a couple of enemies thus far, but it does seem to work with that, in mind. But I would probably recommend turning on some sort of a reticle just to make life a little bit easier, because the aiming can get kind of difficult in a frantic situation when you're trying to play this game. Especially with Resident Evil 2, where you get caught in a lot of really, really tight corridors. going to make it quite difficult for you to kind of roam around and shoot zombies at the same time. Now, you may also have noticed that my character's knees are really bent, and that's probably because I haven't quite set up the height properly just yet. With that said, everything does look absolutely incredible. The fact that we're now able to actually do this is just absolutely nuts, and I don't know why, you know, Capcom hasn't released their own VR mods for these games. It seems quite baffling that it took the modding community to be able to do this, but nonetheless, you know, it is here and it's just absolutely incredible. This is easily like a brand new experience for playing these games. For me personally, I find that this just gives that high level of immersion that you just don't get from the other games, and especially, you know, with the atmosphere here being as scary as it is, all the shadows interplaying with one another, that's just not something that you get in anything other than Resident Evil 7 on PSVR currently, where, you know, you are able to have that sort of VR mode enabled by default. Of course, in here we have to use a mod, but nonetheless, it gets the atmosphere across that much better than the Pancake version ever did. Now, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with playing the vanilla version of the game, it's just it looks so much cooler in VR that you really have to see it to believe it. Now, personally, I think there's definitely still work to be done, but the fact that it's gotten as far as it has is pretty incredible. As you can see, like, the reload animations are a little bit wonky. I'm not sure if the full reloads are implemented yet, or if we're even able to do the reloads sort of manually in VR. I haven't seen that really come to pass thus far, but as you can see, it is, you know, something that could potentially use some improvement at some point later on. Although, to be honest with you, I don't really feel like I'm missing much, because especially when you're in the heat of a battle, having the character auto-reload the weapon for you just makes it that much easier. It's something that you notice you start to miss when you've played the game in the vanilla or Pancake version, if you will, and you start to go into VR and you have to reload manually. Especially in Resident Evil 4, I found that to be the case. Now, here's Resident Evil 7, and as you can see, it's a little bit wonky when you first start. For example, I ended up being teleported outside of my character's body, which is kind of trippy looking, but it is cool to see Ethan. It's just a little bit funny that we don't actually get to see his face. But once you've kind of adjusted a couple of the settings to be able to put yourself into the game and adjust your height, etc., the first-person view looks pretty amazing in general. Now, I would have loved to be able to control the weapons using, you know, my index controllers, although I haven't found the mapping to work quite right, so I ended up using a 360 controller to be able to get the view that you're seeing in here right now, and to be able to actually move my character around. Now, so far, I haven't found a way to enable the motion controls to work, you know, on Resident Evil 7, so I'm not sure if you can use your wands, for example, or your index controllers, whatever you have, you know, Oculus controllers. But thus far, however, it does still look rather incredible. In some ways, I think Resident Evil 7 looks better to me than Resident Evil 2 or 3, the remakes. I don't know what it is, but just something about that first-person view, the weapon models, etc., just looks that much cooler. Now, with that said, again, there are still quite a few quirks. I found that recording the gameplay has been a little bit difficult in, for example, Resident Evil 3. I haven't tried Resident Evil 8 just yet, but I heard they're still trying to kind of implement a lot of things in that, so it seems to be very alpha stage at this point in time, so I didn't really want to touch it. And not to mention the fact that Resident Evil 8 seems to have pretty steep system requirements in general. Not that this game, you know, running full tilt in VR isn't, but with that said, Resident Evil 8 is just that much more kind of advanced, especially if you do end up running the ray tracing options. The other part, again, is just examining the gun models. Because they're 3D, you can just kind of go in and view them from pretty much whatever angle, especially once you're just able to use your room scale to step out of the body and kind of roam around. So you can take a look around basically the entire weapon, and honestly, it's the coolest thing ever. Because you can get different angles, and while it doesn't really help you aim, it does get you to see some very cool shots that you otherwise wouldn't be able to in the base game. And of course, again, it just adds that extra level of immersion into the game because everything just looks so cool, and ultimately you're able to also just view the game from various different angles that you would never been able to before. So with that, that'll conclude this kind of section here, and let's take a look at the final conclusion thus far. So then what can we conclude from taking a look at this video and also just seeing the gameplay in Resident Evil finally being in VR on PC? It's like, quite simply, it's an amazing piece of modding work done by the community, and it does make me wonder what the future holds for just the Resident Evil engine in general moving forward in terms of VR compatibility, and whether or not this will be something that will continue to get further development from the modding team that created it. We'll see how that kind of shakes out, although it is curious now that this mod has been created whether or not we will be seeing ports of something like Resident Evil 4 now also getting some sort of similar compatibility, given that it's most likely Capcom is not going to decide to release Resident Evil 4 on PC because they've already got the commitment to Oculus. Just like when the PlayStation VR was out, they released the version of Resident Evil 7 specifically for the PlayStation VR, which does make me wonder, whether or not we will actually see any of these done by Capcom on the PC, although it is highly unlikely. And again, at this stage, everything is still kind of up in the air as far as the controls go. I am kind of also curious to see why none of the modders that were on the PlayStation 4 scene are digging into the console version of Resident Evil 7 to dig out some of the motion control stuff and how that was set up for the PSVR title, because I would imagine that would translate pretty well over into Resident Evil 7, and from there, by extension, possibly into Resident Evil 8 as well, so that we could get actual proper controls for weapon reloading, for just moving the weapons and hands separately from what we previously used to be able to do in the, of course, standalone vanilla release on PC. But unfortunately, only time will tell. Right now, this is still very early, kind of times for this mod, and also we don't know kind of what is in the pipeline moving forward. They are saying they're still working out a number of kinks with the mods, as well as adding additional functionality to Resident Evil 8, which may come down the pipe at some point here in 2022. We'll just have to wait and see. So with that, guys, if you're interested to see more of this Resident Evil VR gameplay, let me know. If you're interested to see some other games that are in the RE engine being played in VR, do also kind of leave a comment. If you like this kind of content, of course, stick around. I will be posting more videos on this stuff as more content comes out, and hopefully you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next video.